What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 2 of the Max Manis podcast. First episode came out great. Yankees pitching prospect Eric Raiselman hot in the streets right now. So we're keeping the trend going. So I found another Jewish right-handed Yankees pitching prospect that there's not a whole ton of those to pick from, but we managed to find one. Harrison Cohen, what's going on, dude?
How you guys doing? Thanks for having me, Max.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we started the last episode kind of just talking about spring training talk, and that kind of took over the whole intro. But I think that went great because, listen, this is the best time on the baseball calendar, right? Like, there's no, even the fans that know their team might not be doing much this year. It's like everyone's optimistic, everything's fun. You're at camp, there's big leaguers around, you get to rub elbows with some of these guys. Like, how's it been down in Tampa so far?
It's been awesome. I mean, I ever since I signed, I spend my off seasons down in Tampa outside of the holidays when I'll like go up north or if my family comes down here. So besides that, I'm here, basically all year round besides season. So I love Tampa. I love being down here. And it's great. Great environment to be. I'm honestly like it's just I can't imagine kind of being anywhere else. Great, being in Florida, nice warm weather almost all year round, except for there was like a little cold front we had like 2 weeks in a row down here where it was like down to like the 40s, I think, where I was like, this feels like March in New York. Um, but yeah, no, it's been fun. I always look forward to coming to spring training being right around the corner. Even when I was younger as a fan, I grew up a Yankees fan, being from Long Island. Um, and I was never fully into football or any other major sports for watching. So I would watch the Super Bowl, like I'd watch like some big games in football, but for me, every time the Super Bowl would happen, it was always like, okay, that's the last event until baseball season. And then like spring training starts up a couple weeks later pretty much, and then it's full go. Like I would be watching games all the time, so to be able to be a part of some of those and also be able to just go watch them in person, like it's awesome. It's like the little kid in me is just comes out every time.
Yeah, I think every single baseball absolute nut can relate to how you're feeling, that it's almost a little bit like toxic, that it's like we're all like waiting on our phones the second the Super Bowl game ends and they're doing the handshakes on the field. It's just like baseball season, we're here, we're
Yeah.
here. So yeah, it is super cool for you that you grew up a Yankees fan, and then I'm sure that in the days and weeks leading up to you getting drafted, you're definitely hearing from different teams, and I'm sure you're telling yourself like, hey, wherever I go, anywhere it's a big league team, I can't pick favorites, but in the back of your head it's probably like, all right, if I get drafted by the Yankees, this would be pretty sick.
So my path was pretty interesting actually. So I signed a month after the draft in
I forgot about that.
2022.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And so I was a fifth year in college.
Mhm.
And so I had gone through the process a few times. My first year being like truly eligible for the draft was COVID, and they shortened the rounds. That was obviously a tricky situation. And I knew I wasn't getting drafted in the 5 rounds. And there was some interest for the free agency part that was like, a lot of people signed that way in 2020. And, my parents and we were just like, let's go back to like, I'll go back to school. Hopefully it happens next year. And then, 21 unfortunately didn't. And then in 22, I was a fifth year hoping to get drafted, and I was playing my summer ball. I was playing summer ball up in the Cape Cod League, and I went through the draft and was disappointed when I didn't hear my name get called. And so I finished out the summer season. I had my head coach up there, who I've remained very close with to this day. His name is Mike Roberts, and he was the head coach for the Katuitt Kettleers. And so when the season ended, he did everything in his power to try, like help me, get into a uh, get with a team. And it was obviously pretty stressful. And I remember there was one day, my girlfriend Casey and we were going out to Fire Island, and we were going to see my aunt, my uncle, and my cousins who I hadn't seen, in a while, because college and summer, like I really was just home for a couple of days. And so we're going out, and I get a text message that day. It's like, hey, uh, making a final push and mentions the Yankees.
Oh.
This is the first time I'm hearing about this, and I'm like, hey, who knows what's going to happen? I remember looking at Casey, and I was like, who knows what's going to happen? And we get on the ferry, and I was like, honestly, like the day went by completely normally. And I remember being in the pool at my aunt and uncle's place on Fire Island. We were in like their little small pool, and I get out. Like, I was in there for like 15 minutes. I get out and I go check my phone, and I have two missed texts, two missed calls, both from different numbers. One of them being my Katuitt coach, and a number that I don't recognize. And I go and look in my voicemails and recents, and it says Tampa, Florida. I'm like, what did I just miss? And I immediately called the number back, and it was the Yankees. And within a few minutes, there was, a conversation, a contract offer, and the rest is kind of history. And I have a video somewhere of myself receiving that call. So it would have been special regardless. And it was a moment that I dreamed of my whole life. For it to have been the Yankees as that team, it was, I can't really form words for it. Like, it was legitimately like as much of a dream coming true as I could describe to you. And so, it was just the joy that was felt. I was with my aunt and uncle, huge Yankee fans. My parents came out, like they had no plans to come out, and all of a sudden I FaceTime my dad, and I'm like, hey, and he goes and tells my mom comes in, and like I tell both of them, and like just absolutely surreal. And so they come out, and like we're all like happy and celebrating, and then like that was a Friday, and on Sunday I was flying down to Tampa.
Wow.
And so it was the whole process was eye opening and everything. And then the organization is just it's top tier. Like I cannot imagine I can't imagine being with anybody else. Like it's an absolute dream come true.
That is an awesome story, dude. It's interesting you talk about how COVID kind of disrupted everything for you, because I remember when COVID was going on, obviously, like, duh, everything was disrupted. But I remember, like, there was something about talking about athletes that to a lot of people who don't like follow sports super closely, that like when they think of the term athlete, they think everyone's Garrett Cole making like $300 million, like getting like, oh, like those guys aren't struggling, like they'll be fine. For a guy who like, sure, I'm not a first round, second round draft pick, but like I think I have there's a lot of rounds in the MLB draft. I think I have a good chance to get drafted. For a guy like you, suddenly when the news is like, hey, 5 rounds this year, if you're not in the first 5, you're gonna have to kind of figure it out on your own. That must have been like a pretty, I don't know about terrifying experience. Frankly, like it worked out pretty well. But it's interesting that like I wonder, I would guess that in 5-10 years down the road, we're probably going to look back at 2020 specifically, and there are going to be some really cool stories of kind of like diamonds in the rough that maybe would have been snatched up in the 6th or 7th round in a traditional year. But because of the nature of how that year went, some team like Ben Rice is a great example that when he came up this past year, there were all these stories of like, yeah, during COVID, he was in college and it was canceled. He was at Dartmouth. So he was playing like Cape Cod ball, and one of the high up Yankee scouts just happened to be there, like watching his kid or something. And he was like, wait, who's this kid? Like this kid.
So fun fact, Ben Rice and I were summer ball teammates in 2021.
Oh, nice. Okay. You got any good Ben Rice stories? Because I've never seen Yankees fans just immediately adore a player the way that, I mean, 3 homers against the Red Sox is pretty legit.
He's the man. I mean, there aren't enough nice things to say about Ben. I remember, like he was only there for I think 2 weeks ish, because the season I remember started I think a week later than normal, and then the draft was around then, and he got drafted by the Yankees, and he went and he reported. But I remember the first day of practice when they were taking BP. Here's this Dartmouth catcher, and the way that the park was at Katuitt, ton of trees behind the fence. He's clearing them. with ease, with absolute ease. And I remember shagging it. I'm like, oh, wow. Like it was just a show. And it was always so fun to watch. It was always so fun to talk to him. And so it's funny that, throughout uh, my time, he caught me in 2021. He caught me my first year in 2023. And, he's caught me a couple times and I think like live ABs or a bullpen like now. And like I said, like there are not enough nice things to say about him.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if he's ever caught you because that I've been beating the drum very hard on Twitter that like he was when he got called up to the bigs was basically like Rizzo went down, we need a first baseman, we need an offensive spark, and it was like, hey, we have this catcher who hasn't played a lot of first base, but he's raking down in the minors, so like we'll teach him first base on the fly and he'll figure it out. And it got to a point now where I'm like, well, like the Yankees, Wells is awesome, obviously goes without saying, but we could kind of use a backup catcher. So like, I'm very much of the opinion that like, hey, if Ben Rice can be our backup catcher and play twice a week at catcher, twice a week at first, some DH in there, like I think that's a skill that they would be foolish not to continue to utilize. What was your experience like throwing to him?
Ben's great. Ben is the Dartmouth title speaks for a little bit of volumes of his character and who he is. I mean, he's extremely smart. He's great behind the plate. I always love throwing to him. So I'm excited to see what he can do, what he ends up doing this year.
Yeah, are there other prospects that you can think of in the Yankee system, whether it's names that people do or don't know already, that from the moment you met him, you were like, this is going to be a dude?
Oof. Drew Thorpe was like that. I know, obviously, he's no longer with the Yankees, but he always had like there was always something with that. With his arsenal and how he just pitched, it was always a pleasure watching it. Um, I mean, there's so many because the Yankees do such a great job of. I know that Eric had honestly touched on it in his podcast with you, but the Yankees do such a great job of figuring out what guys do well and running with it and being able to develop tools and talent. And it's you see guys come in and they could be known for their fastball, like they could be known for heavy fastball usage, or oh, he throws hard, and all of a sudden you add a cutter, a sweeper, a changeup. Like you add three more pitches to the mix, and boom! Now that guy who had maybe below average stuff with a good fastball now has 4+ pitches. And granted, I guess that's the way development works at times, but the Yankees are fantastic at it.
Yeah, it's got to be like an interesting give and take in the back of your head as a pitching prospect because on one hand, like the Yankees are so good at developing pitching that like they're gonna make me an incredible big leaguer and I'm pumped for that. But at the same time, it's kind of like man, like there are as a result of that, they have so many dudes that they could call up to pitch the seventh inning in the big leagues on any given night, and like dudes could give you an effort that it kind of ends up being like some guys get shipped out and deals for other players because they're just like, listen, we have too many pitchers, we don't want to lose these guys in the Rule 5, like we want to get something for them.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's also at the same time got to be like, hey man, if I can, if I get shipped off somewhere and I become a big leaguer and I can, I get to another organization where they, maybe aren't as high of a level, suddenly like I have so much going for me just from being in the Yankees org that I have like a step up and there's a clear pathway to the majors, whether it's with the Yankees or elsewhere, I would imagine, as a result of that.
For sure. I would say for myself, looking at it personally, I've done a lot since getting in 2022 that what I tell a lot of people for myself is I spent so much time worrying about getting in and getting signed that I spent so much time focusing my energy and everything mentally on getting there that once I got there, like every day in front of me was the focus. And so for me, like all those points are valid, but for me, I've never thought anything other than I want to debut with the Yankees. I want to be a big leaguer with the Yankees. And, is that, I mean, that's obviously partly, my Yankee fandom and being a diehard Yankee fan, but that's also just, I, I want to set out to achieve the goal that I've always wanted. And, I think for me, keeping myself grounded and being where my feet are on a day-to-day basis is like has been the best thing for me mentally, and I think it allows me to be in a really good headspace to be able to go and compete every day.
It's interesting. We were talking with Eric last episode about how your mindset, like for him, he talked about how his mindset shift was that he was just such a competitor that he could never think of anything other than baseball. That when he got drafted and that became such a huge part of his life, he kind of had to realize, like, oh, I almost need to push myself to kind of appreciate life outside of baseball, because if this just overwhelms me 24/7, like, I'm not going to be able to get anywhere. And it sounds like you're touching on another version of, like, when you get drafted, your relationship with baseball, which is this hugely important part of your life, changes more than a lot of people would realize. So, like, when you think of the different stages of your relationship with baseball in your life, when you're playing little league up until high school, college, that COVID craziness that you were talking about, up until now in the minors, and hopefully soon enough in the bigs, how has your like mindset towards and your relationship with baseball changed?
Honestly, my relationship with baseball has always been um, strong is the word, but it's growing. Um, I think naturally, we're doing it every day, and it's way more than you did growing up, obviously. And I've always had a love for baseball that I think has just, especially with how I described looking at it mentally, with the going about it day to day, it's helped my love for the game grow because I can enjoy each day, and I don't worry about what's going to happen in a couple months or whenever, and I allow myself to be present with people I like, with my friends, with my teammates, coworkers, everybody. It allows me to honestly have a different viewpoint, I would say, on the game than I ever did. And I would, from a very young age, my parents and my dad and I were always, I mean, endless car rides to and from games, endless conversations, endless, diner trips late at night, post, travel ball games. There's so many memories, and all of that built a foundation of, love for the game. And it's been really something to see how it can continue growing. And it's funny, everybody needs different ways to decompress and get away from the game. And for me, I mean, I'm a little nuts when it comes to some things that, like, I could be at the field for 10 hours from say we get there at 1 and the game ends at 10, and I don't have anything to do until 12 o'clock the next day. I'm probably playing MLB The Show.
Nice.
Like, I'm my way of doing, like, I'm gonna watch a Yankee game. Like, I'm gonna watch some baseball if it's on. I've always been like that, and I think it's always very fun to talk to guys about their routines and their ways to decompress, and it's fun to to go back and forth with guys on what they like to do.
It's cool that you talked earlier about how, like, it was kind of always just baseball for you. Like, you were never really the biggest football, basketball, whatever it is. You were kind of just like, listen, baseball is it. What do you think did that? Was it family? Do you think there was just something in you that it was just like, baseball is it for me?
My brother played baseball. My sister played softball and tennis. They're both older than me. I'm the youngest by about 8 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then my brother and sister are close. We're all very close relationship wise. But I grew up, going to my brother's games. I grew up, and my dad spent an insane amount of time with me. He was my first coach. He would go to and from pitching lessons, batting lessons, everything. And so from a very young age, I played other sports recreationally. Like, did I basically played, I would say, every sport at some point besides hockey and football.
Okay.
Those are the two sports I never like really, really played.
Mhm.
And I started playing travel like all year round for baseball at a very young age. I think I started playing like full travel ball around 8 years old. Like
Whoa.
I got out of our little league, league at a very young age. My dad, I was either 8 or 9, I think. But that turned into spring ball, summer ball,
Mhm.
fall ball, and then winter off season, winter workouts, and it it was a lot of time devoted to baseball where I really couldn't focus on anything else. And honestly, it's hard to remember, obviously, but I don't think I really wanted to.
Mhm.
As long as I can remember, and as long as anybody that knows me can remember from those days, it was baseball. It was always baseball.
Mhm.
And my dad and I'd go get a pitching lesson, and my dad and I would, my throwing for the day, like in the days that followed, was I would go and obviously growing up in New York, when there's snow on the ground, I'd go down to my basement where we have a little gym, and I would have a net set up in my basement, and I had a bucket of baseballs.
Mhm.
And my dad, who was very, involved with my pitching lessons, with delivery mechanics and everything, because he went through the same thing with my brother. He would, we'd work on mechanics, we'd work on how I was feeling, and I just throw over and over, and that was my throwing into the net. And it was every day. It was like almost every day, I would say,
Mhm.
of like us doing that. But that built a foundation for how my delivery is, and I would say the little things like that, which honestly, at the end of the day, isn't so little because that's a lot of repetition. And we did that for a long time growing up, and I think that really helped me, become very involved with pitching. And I didn't always, I wasn't always just a pitcher. Like I play outfield, so like we would do the same thing downstairs. Like when I would throw into the net, I'd hit off a tee,
Mhm.
and so we'd be down there. We'd end up being down there for an hour, like every other night.
Mhm.
And so I never, like, there was never another sport, honestly. So I played baseball for a long time, like, pretty much primarily from a young age.
Mhm.
And it was like, baseball is huge in my family, like everyone's a diehard Yankee fan.
Mhm.
Everyone. I have jerseys in my closet.
Mhm.
I have pictures of myself from old Yankee Stadium. The picture I posted when I signed was a picture of me. I don't even remember how old I was. It was the last year of the old stadium, so it would have been 2008. So I must have been 9. And the picture I posted is me in a Derek Jeter like imaged jersey on the front with
Mhm.
his number on the back. And I'm like making the same face I always make in like all the still shots at like release with like my angry face.
Mhm.
But what people don't know about who was on the receiving end of that photo was Mariano Rivera.
Whoa. Wow.
And so it was a tour that I think I got for my birthday at 9. And it was a tour of the old Yankee Stadium before obviously it was torn down. And we met a lot of legends that day. Mickey Rivers was there, and I remember hitting off the tee on the field. But that photo, we like got to throw on the field and like pitch, and Mariano caught us.
Wow.
And there's a picture somewhere of me shaking his hand, and it's just like you see the fan, like you see how the fandom
Mhm.
is, and like it's so awesome being able to like have these memories and be able to like tell these stories, because baseball's been a passion and obviously a focus of my whole family for forever. Like we always watch stuff, so like the amount of memories I have of baseball growing up are endless.
Mhm. Have you had any moments now that you're in the org where you've gotten to like rub elbows with someone that you like watched when you were younger or always heard about that you're like, wow, like I see you in person now and I was just this 8-year-old kid who was a huge Yankees fan and couldn't believe what I was seeing on TV and now like you're standing a foot away from me?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mhm.
So I mean, just recently, I got the chance to meet Andy Pettit,
Mhm.
Ron Guidry, and obviously I wasn't born to watch Ron Guidry, but he's a legend, and so just meeting these guys, it's always so cool. Like it's humbling and it's also exciting.
Mhm. Yeah. No, no,
It's
go.
and obviously guys that I grew up watching, those come right to mind. But even our current big leaguers, and being able to have a conversation with Aaron Judge,
Mhm.
with Garrett Cole, and guys who come into the facility, or you see them right before spring training, like they're all fantastic people, and they're all willing to talk. Like like I think there's definitely nerves of like going up to these guys, so you kind of don't do it. But I always will remember my first off season when I met Aaron Judge for the first time.
Mhm.
You know, introduced himself like he was anybody else, and then you see him. You chat with him a little bit. Saw him a year later, remembers my name, shakes my hand,
Wow.
and it's just all. It's as if you have an understanding of each other, and it's just he's the most worthy of a captain title you could bestow on somebody.
Yeah, that's so crazy because when I asked that, I was thinking like, oh, you were gonna say like, oh, like my dad always told me about this guy, but like you forget like, you're not that much older than I am. Like I was a high school freshman when Judge was like taking over the league. Like
Hmm.
I consider that in a way like I kind of like grew up on Judge a little bit. Like I grew up on Jeter, but like the end of my childhood was Judge, and I'm sure you kind of feel the same way that the first time you watched Aaron Judge, you weren't in this like, oh, I'm a ball player and all ball players are the same and I don't see that guy. Like, no, you were probably like a high school, like, starting off college age kid, and you were still like a huge Yankees fan. And Aaron Judge was like this dude that was taking New York by storm, breaking rookie
Oh,
run records.
I,
Like,
I still remember watching him and Tyler Austin go back to back. Like
yeah.
I still remember that. It's funny because I know that you always post like the immaculate grid stuff, and like I was doing that for so long. It's just like I love knowing like I love having all that information sometimes, and like knowing it, or like remembering who threw what pitch this day, or like I don't know I definitely don't know it as in depth as you. Like my scores on immaculate grid have never been quite as absurd as yours. But it's always fun, like being able to dig deep for the knowledge of that. um, but yeah, I mean, for as long as I can remember, uh, watching the Yankees games growing up, like there's always like a memory you can have, and being able to meet those guys and get along with them has been great. And the guy the player that I idolized, wore the number 4, my whole childhood, who I haven't had the chance to meet yet, and hopefully one day I will, is Jorge Posada.
Okay, nice. Wow. Yeah, dude, I mean, dude, the Yankees are bringing in like any dude who once played for the Yankees and has a pulse. They're like, I'm just spring training, so like they'll get Posada in there. I'll make some calls. I'll make sure that happens. Yeah, dude, I think it's like a lot of times when players come over to the team, like there's so many guys that will come over and you hear the line like, oh, I was a Yankees fan growing up a lot. And sometimes it'll be like, a dude that it's like, okay, oh yeah, everyone's a Yankees fan growing up. The Yankees, especially like, dude, if you grew up in the mid 90s, like why would you not be a Yankees fan? You know what I mean?
Of
That
course.
I think it's gotten to a point where we hear that so much that Yankees fans almost have like we need to see you prove it. Like, how much of a Yankees fan are you actually? So, like, when Volpe came up, and there were these stories about like his dad used to like call into WFAN and like Mad Dog and stuff like that, and be like screaming about the Yankees over the phone. And that's the kind of thing like you talk about like this New York Yankees culture of like my dad watched the Yankees, my grandpa watched the Yankees. Like they took me to Old Timers Day when I was 6 years old, and they pointed out like it's real. Like people clown Yankees fans for that a little bit, I think, but it's like, no, like let's own it. It's awesome. Like it is so cool that Yankees lineage and history and all that is so deeply ingrained that like I don't know how many other teams that, like, if someone was playing for however many number of teams at MLB, that they could personally be like, oh, their catcher from 20 years ago is someone that I really want to meet one day.
Yeah, of course.
Um, yeah, dude, that's awesome. So we talked a lot about how much you love baseball, which is the whole point of this podcast. So that's awesome. Was there a time when that love was like really challenged, when you had to either a decision you had to make of like, are we really going to keep pursuing this, or a time when you were like, man, I love baseball, but this is really wearing on me and this is hard right now? And like, how did that change your mindset towards it?
I would say there was never a point where I fell out of love with the game,
Mhm,
but there was a point where I was extremely disappointed.
mhm,
And I could tell you exactly when and where I was.
mhm,
It was day 3 of the 2022 MLB draft, and I was on Cape, and I was starting at the time. I was a starter, so I was scheduled to throw in game. I want to say like 2 days later,
mhm,
and I'm sitting in the bullpen at Hyannis, one of the other teams.
mhm,
And I was sitting in the bullpen, and I remember we were allowed, on the draft days, if you were a guy that was, eligible, you could have your phone for a phone call or whatever. And I remember being on MLB Draft Tracker, just watching pick after pick after pick, and sitting in the bullpen and hearing nothing. And I remember, you know, on one hand there was that going on, and on the other hand, a guy who I had played with in 21 and that year in 22, I watched him sign,
mhm.
and so I was ecstatic for him, and at the same time obviously very, disheartened, disappointed.
Yeah.
And I remember after that game I had to throw a pen, and where my parents were, we're being in Long Island, it was 3.5, 4 hour drive. But because of the draft and everything, they wanted to possibly be there if I heard anything, and my parents were there, and they had a relationship with my Coach Roberts. I remember I was throwing a pen post game, like under the lights. Nobody's really there. Like our team is still there, but I'm throwing a pen, and I remember it was just like a angry bullpen.
Mhm.
Like it was a lot of emotions kind of coming out, and I remember like my like I cut it short. My coach was like, "All right, you got to start in a couple of days." Like, you know, but I remember the dinner that followed that night, that game. I went to dinner with my girlfriend, my parents,
Mhm.
and I remember something was said at the table. I don't remember exactly what it was, and I broke down. Like
Mhm.
it was all the emotions coming out at once, and it was hard. That was probably the low point, I would say. But I never fell out of love with the game. And that night motivated me more to try to prove something. And it made the feeling of signing all the more rewarding when it actually came. So
Mhm.
I'd say that was the low point and only built from there.
Yeah, it's cool that like a lot of areas of life, if you have one job or one thing that you're obsessed with, that you just do it over and over and over, like you're naturally going to reach a point where I think with most things a lot of people just take a step back and they're like, all right, I need to take a day away from this. And it's interesting that sports, and I think baseball specifically, there's something that it's like no matter what emotion you have, you can turn that into baseball. Like I have some friends that can't believe that I watch like every single Yankees game if it's not, if I'm not off my phone for Jewish religious reasons, that like,
Of
oh, you
course.
want to come hang out on Thursday night? And I'm like, well, are we watching the Yankees game? Because like, priorities. And that's like completely insane to some people that it's like, how could you want to do that every single night? And I'm like, I don't think you guys understand that it's like if I had a rough day for whatever reason, there's nothing I want to do more when I get home than just turn on a baseball game and like my emotional energy and investment is fully in that for 3 hours. If I had an awesome day, there's nothing I'm looking forward to doing more than getting home and turning on the game. I think, I remember a lot of Yankees fans posting this after the World Series and being like, this is what a Yankee says, that they interviewed Volpe after game 5, and he was clearly, like, crushed, like just lost a World Series, like he grew up rooting for the Yankees. Now you're on the Yankees, this isn't how this was supposed to end. And he went on like the Jalen Brunson roommates podcast this offseason.
Okay.
And they asked him like what he did like after the World Series. He was like, that very night, as soon as I finished media, I just like went to the batting cage and took like a couple hours of hacks. And it's like, yeah, there's something about baseball that it's like, no matter how much it frustrates you, and like justifiably so, like you'd be crazy to never have been frustrated by something like that you're so invested in, but there's something about it that just keeps bringing us back, and it's like, this frustrates me, but the only way I know to get out of it is just by like doubling down on this until I feel better.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. It's funny. You made me think of when you said like, you watched every single game. It made me think of, it's random, but one of my college roommates that I got very close with, it's one of my favorite videos that I have on my phone. But every time around opening day, there'll be, the Twitter memes that come out of the Yes Network theme song. And I have a video on my phone of me hitting play on my computer and him just dancing like a goof in our living room as it comes on, because it was a couple of days until opening day. And I always will send it to him, watch it whenever I see it pop up on like my memories or anything, because it's so perfect. Because like every time I hear that music, it's like, oh, I'm locked in.
Yeah, I always say, I think like everyone loves the pomp and circumstance of opening day and the fact that it's like, wow, like today is going to be awesome. The games are so fun. Baseball's back. For me, it's never been so much about the day itself. It's about the knowledge of like, there's no thing in my life that provides consistent like stability and structure and just enjoyment. And like, I know that on opening day starts a 7 month, like 7 month. That's a long time.
Yeah.
7 month long stretch of every single night I get to get home and turn on I know what I'm doing, 7 to 10 p.m. every single night. Like, it is not a question. It's not up for debate, to the point that like during like a couple of the worst days, I don't know about worst days, but the most difficult days for me to get through every year are like the 2 days around the Derby and the All-Star game, when it's just like, wait, it's a Wednesday night in July and like there's no baseball on. Like,
yeah,
there's always supposed to be baseball on. Like, what is this? And I think that's what you're talking about. That like when I watch the first spring training game and I can hear that Yes Network music that you're talking about, there's something of just like, oh, like peace. Like, we're back. Life is normal again.
Yeah, we're back.
Yeah,
like, we're so back.
I remember during COVID especially, it was like when like they were playing these like intra-squad scrimmage games, and it was like Bombers versus Clippers, and they had like one camera angle on the Yes Network, and they were showing it, and I was like, I'm watching it. I don't care what it is. Baseball, I need it. I'm watching it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about your Jewish identity, because that's kind of how you and I got connected a little bit, was you hitting me up, and we worked on like some Israel charity stuff in the past. I'm curious. Everyone always says, it's a line that I've heard whenever I'm at like a Shabbat dinner or whatever it is, and baseball comes up and I talk about how that's what I do. Everyone says like, oh, like baseball's such a Jewish sport. And it's tough to pinpoint like an exact reason why that's true, but I really do think there is something about like Judaism and the culture, no matter whether you're, super religious, like, own a flip phone, wouldn't watch a baseball game, to like the most, eating bacon cheeseburgers on Yom Kippur. I think every single Jew that's connected to their culture and their history in some way understands that a big part of this is the history and the tradition and the lineage, and like there's something about the fact that we still do things in a lot of ways. Like we still value very similar things to what we valued however many years ago. And I think baseball is a very similar way that it's like, if you're a baseball fan and you're just like, screw the tradition, screw the history, screw everything, everyone's like, dude, like what are you doing being a baseball fan? Like go watch like Formula One or something. Like, what do you think it is about like, because for you, it seems like those two identities are very closely tied.
Honestly, I've never really thought of it like that.
Hmm.
But I think baseball sticks in everybody's minds for the history of it, as you kind of you spoke to. But I think for Jews and Jewish culture, I mean, you think about the history of players who have played and who have become legends in both Judaism in Jewish communities, and who are it's like Sandy Koufax, Hank Greenberg, all the big names that you like learn about growing up. And I remember like in my Hebrew school, like we had pictures of Sandy Koufax and Hank Greenberg. And it's like, oh, that's just a random thing to have in our Hebrew school. But I don't know how to describe it. I feel like it's kind of like you said, like it's ingrained in people, and especially in Jewish culture, baseball always seems to be kind of popular. And like everybody always kind of finds one another like especially in baseball. I mean, granted, like there are not a ton of Jews, in Major League Baseball. But I mean, hey, hopefully the number keeps on growing.
Yeah, we're all around it. We're in like the media side. We're in the like all of the baseball adjacent areas. The playing.
Your tweet that you made a few months back like went extremely viral in
Which
like
tweet?
the New York Yankees.
Oh yeah, dude, that was like so we'll give people some context. I know you, I know Eric, I know Scott Efros a little bit. So when the Yankees signed Max Fried, first off, like I had some like the Dominican versus Israel WBC game a couple years ago when we don't have to talk about how that went for Israel. It went very predictably for Israel, but there was something about it being like, oh, Soto just left, he's going to the Mets, and that the Yankees were like, oh, we just lost a Dominican player. What's the first thing we're going to do? Go sign a Jewish player. That I was like, someone wake me up from this dream I'm in, because this isn't supposed to go this way. But yeah, and like you guys have Osmus on the staff now, so there's something like so sick of like, dude, in New York of all places, like the Yankees knew what they were doing there a little bit. You know what I mean?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Also, that Dominican Republic
Yeah.
Israel game. Shout out to Jacob Steinmetz.
Yeah,
For
dude, shout out to Jacob.
for striking out. I forget who he struck out. I think it might have been Machado and Jerry
Yeah,
Sanchez.
dude, that's like, yeah, big time
Yeah.
stuff. He came to the office.
I remember that.
He visited the John Boy office. I set it up like a year or so ago, and I remember because like he's like an athletic guy, but it's he was like this tall Jewish kid that like looked.
Oh, he's great.
Like
He's the man.
And then I bring him into the John Boy office, and I'm like, this guy pumped Manny Machado in the WBC, and everyone was like, okay, respect.
I met Jacob back in 2021 when he was right before he got drafted. We went to a couple pro days together. I got to know him, got to know his dad. Great, absolutely phenomenal family. They were with Together 18. Like they were involved a little bit as well. Like they're great people.
Yeah, Elliot is the absolute man. Shout out Elliot.
Yeah.
It's funny. I want to go back what you were saying about Koufax and how like every Jewish kid grows up on that story. That like even if you're Jewish, even if you don't give a crap about sports, it's like you've heard the name Sandy Koufax at some point. That there was some point that we were having some just like talking. We talk a lot of baseball in the John Boy Media office, as you can imagine. And there was one point that we were just talking about like it was like a random off-season day. We're just trying to fill time talking about like greatest pitchers, and Sandy Koufax came up somehow. And I remember one of the other like Jews who works at our company turned to me and they were like, didn't pitch on Yom Kippur. And I remember at that second, I turned to one of my non-Jewish coworkers and I was like, do you know that story? And they were like, what? And I was like, it was like a thing that like Sandy Koufax, like Yom Kippur is like the holiest day of the Jewish year. Like you're not really supposed to do any kind of like work or sports or anything. And Koufax was supposed to pitch in World Series Game 1 and he didn't. And it was this whole controversy, but he was like, no, my Jewish identity is important. I'm not going to pitch. And they were like, no, I've never heard that story. And that was so funny because to me, I was like, who hasn't heard that story? Like that story was all I heard growing up. And then I realized,
Yeah.
oh, every single Jewish kid has heard that story because like we don't have a lot of examples of pro athletes being like, my Jewish identity is so important that I'm going to take a step back. But like we got one, so we don't shut up about it. But like Koufax is a Hall of Famer, and like the average non-Jewish baseball fan, even if they're a huge baseball fan, probably does not know that story. But to me,
Yeah.
like that's up there with like Babe Ruth's called shot as like, duh, who doesn't know about that?
I get that for sure. I mean, obviously, I grew up, I heard about that story, and as people, my whole family knows the story. And obviously, we talked about it, and there's a documentary. If you could, even, no, it's definitely a documentary, but it's called Fastball, and I mean, I watched that so many times when it came out, but I remember, obviously I never watched Sandy Koufax when he pitched, but there was a video of it because everyone talked about how his fastball was different than anybody else's. And they had like a couple of videos, like amateur film of him, and I remember watching. And like honestly, if you ever watch like any video of Sandy Koufax, like just a really, really fun pitcher to watch. And like he had the Clayton Kershaw of whatever, I don't know what decade he played in.
Like 50s, 60s ish.
It was the 50s, 60s.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, like I mean, he had a Clayton Kershaw curveball in the before Clayton Kershaw, and like he had that high fastball, big breaking ball, and that was it. I mean, it was always so fun to watch clips of him, and obviously he's like an icon and an idol in the Jewish community.
Yeah, are there other pitchers that stick out to you, whether guys that you like actually watched in person on TV or just like historically, like guys that you're consistently like watching either their film or just like watching their starts and stuff like that to try to learn certain things?
Just from a baseball perspective.
Sure, I mean however you want to take it, but yeah.
Growing up, I mean I would say from I'll do this in like two parts.
Sure.
From a Yankee fan perspective, I always loved watching CeCe, of how much of a competitor he was, and he was going to leave everything on the field. I'll never forget him hitting. I forget who was batting in retaliation in his last inning, and
dude, all time
being that leader, and that's all time, obviously. And then as I was getting older and kind of just watching the game, like I remember watching Garrett Cole in 2019 and being just in awe of like, wow, this is a different dude. And so it's cool being able to watch him now in person. And I was lucky enough to watch him up close last year, and like being able to do that, like it's just it's great. And it's a learning experience every time you're around a guy like that. But I tried growing up to kind of, if I was watching a pitcher, see what they did well, see like what made them kind of tick in a way, what made them who they are. And I remember always kind of not associating, but I remember watching, even when Sonny Gray was a Yankee, that was someone I loved watching him, because I remember there was something discussed about him where he would basically have 9 pitches that he could throw at any point, because he would tweak different grips and he would be able to do that. And I always thought that was really cool. Actually, I can't believe I didn't. Wow, I cannot believe that I didn't say the obvious name in my head.
Okay.
I didn't miss a Masahiro Tanaka start.
Oh, dude. Come on.
I didn't miss one. I could call up my dad right now and ask him how nuts I drove my entire family in the off season when he got posted. I was sending YouTube clips into my family group chat of Masahiro Tanaka in the NPB, and they're all like, "What?" And I'm just like, "The Yankees need to get this guy." And then they got him, and I remember my brother or my dad sending a text of like, "Now he can stop."
It was only starting. They didn't even realize.
Oh, it was only starting. I remember being in high school and watching. I remember being like, I think I had I had either had my first iPhone or a BlackBerry Torch,
Mhm.
and whatever it was, I think the BlackBerry might have had YouTube capabilities, so that's the only reason why I'm thinking it might have been. But I
Yeah.
remember watching Tanaka's first start against the Blue Jays in his Yankee career. Like it, just so many memories, and it, like kind of rears its head, like we were talking about earlier. But so many memories, and like I loved watching him. I was kind of taught in a way to kind of emulate Japanese pitchers with kind of their leg lifts and how they kind of
Mm.
and their deliveries. And so like I always was infatuated watching those guys, and especially him because he was just so fun.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're like such a student of pitching because I know you've done like a lot of drive line stuff in the past, and you're very much like we've had some talks about like baseball pitching mechanics and philosophy that like might go over the head of the average, even like big baseball fan. Like you are in the weeds, like you are whether it because and clearly it goes back to back in the day, like for you to be the age you were watching Tanaka, being like, oh, I think I want to emulate the Japanese pitching mechanics. Like, I don't think that's what's going through the head of every single Yankees fan kid that's watching Tanaka when they were growing
Oh no, for sure. But it wasn't even just that I was watching him and being like, I want to do that.
up. Mhm.
It was watching him because I was kind of taught to do that. So
Ah, yes.
anytime I saw a guy like him, Hiroki Kuroda, any of those, any Japanese pitchers who kind of looked like that with their delivery, with the
Mhm.
simple gather and the little like slower tempo, it always stuck out to me because it looked like me.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's one of the funniest things to look back on that baseball just got so wrong for so long is there was an era of baseball where people would talk about like the Asian style of play and they would be like that's never going to transfer to the big leagues. That funky leg kick, like the timing is off, that's never going to work and it's like fast forward 10 years and the Dodgers are paying $1 billion to just have all
Forget
the
about
Japanese
that, but
players.
the cool thing about baseball, and I mean I'm sure you'll agree, baseball is so different than any other sport. And I think you touched on it with Eric actually, because like anybody, like not anybody, but it's the variety of who plays is so wide. And it's funny because you see nobody has the same exact batting stance. Nobody has the same exact delivery. Everybody does something that's unique to them, whether it's a move, whether it's a movement. Look at Bronson Arroyo.
Yeah.
Like, you know, high leg kicks, short leg kicks, slide steps. There's so many different things you can do to be, put yourself in a potential to be successful. And so many different things work for everybody's bodies. That's what we learn with the sports science department and high speed cameras and slow mos and everything. The slightest things can make or break your delivery in a way. Like, okay, like if I move too fast with my leg, like okay, I'm not in the right position. And like it's like those minor things that separate someone from throwing. I mean, theoretically, someone from throwing 92 or 94, and then little things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I honestly don't know enough about like football or basketball coaching to say this confidently, but I would venture to assume that like in a lot of other sports, my uneducated assumption would be that the best of the best get to where they are because they kind of perfected their like go-to craft. That it's like Steph Curry's three, like it's obviously sure you're shooting from different parts on the court, like it's different every time, but it's like you gotta if you can perfect one thing and be really good at that one thing, that can get you pretty far in baseball, like unless you're Mariano Rivera and you have this like otherworldly cutter, you kind of always, especially as a pitcher, you have to be experimenting with new things because your fastball that's always been great, eventually like you're going to start facing hitters that know how to tune that up or they're going to pick up on something and suddenly like they're going to adjust and it's going to be on you to play the next card. That it's this interesting balance of like as a pitcher I would imagine it's like you want to perfect the things that you're really really good at and you want to make them so good, but you never want to get to a point where it's like I can't tinker with this at all because tinkering with it and like finding the slight adjustment in arm slot or leg kick or whatever it is, like that's everything that changes literally
It's
everything.
it's finding it's finding things to tinker when appropriate,
Mhm.
because obviously you said like you don't want to tinker constantly. Um, but the cool, like one of the really interesting things about pitching, especially, is just that something doesn't work one day, you identify it and you're like, oh,
Mhm.
and then you try something and then it works. And it's minor tweaks, and like you have to be, malleable. You have to be able to adapt and do that. And not always, like obviously sometimes you don't change things and sometimes you do. But that's kind of the art of it. The
Mhm.
art of pitching, the art of baseball. Like it's just so every little detail matters.
Mhm. Harrison, this has been an absolute blast, dude. I don't want to take any more of your time, but I feel like we could go on for hours and hours and hours because we're just
100%,
talking about
100%.
baseball.
I could talk baseball forever.
Awesome. So we'll have to do it another time then because this was absolutely awesome. Harrison Cohen, thank you a ton. Anything you want to leave Yankees fans, baseball fans with before we wrap this up?
Just looking forward to hopefully a good year and watching some baseball, playing some baseball, and hope to be on here again soon.
Awesome. Thanks again, Harrison. Appreciate everyone listening. Thank you guys a ton. Much more coming soon.
Thanks for having me.